What you doing? I'm the AC. Welcome to Otaku News Reviews. I'm talking about Junji Ito's short story collection, Deserter. This came out in English December 21st, 2021. This is supposed to be like a collection of his earliest works, and that is something I'm really going to focus on in this review. Kind of seeing what his earliest looked like and the differences it was from then and how it gotten better now. How he really finalized his style into what we see more often. Because, especially in the first few, there are some stark differences. I don't know exactly for sure if all 12 of these stories are in chronological order when he wrote them and released them. It's apparently impossible to find out any information on early Junji Ito days, which is what makes this so great. I couldn't find anything about when each of these stories were released, how they were released, all that stuff. Maybe if I could speak Japanese and could access all those kind of archives or whatever on the internet, I could do that. But I don't have those skills yet. But, according to good old legal blah, blah, blah text in the back, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. This was first released as Ito Junji Kisakushu Go Dasohei no Iru Ie. It was published in Japan originally in 2011 by Asahi Shimbun Publications Incorporated. It does say this hauntingly strange story collection showcases a dozen of Junji Ito's earliest works from when he burst onto the horror scene, sowing fresh seeds of horror. And I'll say, they definitely are. It is interesting to see start. Now, I don't know if these are the very first ones. It would be cool to see the very first ones. Even though I have everything that's been released in English, I don't know if we're even close, English-wise, to having all of Junji Ito's stories. But at least I got 12 more of them in this. And I'm pretty sure all 12 of them, none of them have been in anything else, like the anime or any other collections in English. These are all brand new to me, which is cool. That's what I like. That's what I'm going for. What I am going to do, though, is try to contrast anything that's different from what I see. There's not a whole lot that I picked up right off the bat. I only read through it once, so if I want to really analyze it and compare it to all my other ones, I probably could. And I kind of wanted to, but that's a lot. That's a lot for me to do. So starting with the first story, Biohouse. This one and the second one, art is the biggest thing that catches my attention. I feel like it gets better from the third story on. But the art is definitely different. It's less refined. It does kind of look chubbier. Even just looking at like this title page, the face is a little chubbier, not as defined. And it's a lot darker, blacker. A lot more black ink is on the page, and less of his shading that kind of adds the creepiness to it. As far as the story of this one, at least this first one, pretty a cut and dry story to it. Still weird, but nothing phenomenally Junji Ito. It does feel different than what he normally has. Not something completely out of part, but compared to his usual kind of weird supernatural, or even like when there are just messed up people themselves, there's nothing that different to it. It's almost a take on vampires, because what is going on in this one is there's this guy who's in the title page that I assume invited this woman over, and they both have like an appetite for exotic animals as food. She's still kind of a lightweight to it, but she's trying. And then he leaves, but he comes back with blood, and she's like, I don't like this. And he's like, oh, that's a shame, that's my blood. And I'm like, ew, gross. And then she's grossed out about he doesn't like that. He has servants that seem like vampires, and that's pretty much it. It's just he offers his blood to these vampires to work for him, it seems like, and then he's trying to catch her. I don't know if they're actually vampires or just weirdos that like blood. That's pretty much it, and just her trying to escape from that. She eventually releases some animals, and then she kind of just turns him into his own demise because others are obsessed with his blood. Not my favorite, I'll say. Definitely feels early. Feels like he's still trying to get a hold of whatever. On to the next one though. Face Thief. This is where you're starting getting the more psychological, supernatural aspects of stuff. It's about a girl moves to a new school and there's someone that seems obsessed with her, and then another guy who warns her, hey, be careful around her. She'll try to steal your face. That's what she does to people she's around. And that's pretty much it. The main character is kind of like a little badass wannabe chick. But eventually, she just eventually pulls like a trick to make it so she can't, whatever this creature or person is, can't see their face to turn into her. They just wear a mask. Definitely a start. This, you can see exactly, this is his style. The art, though, same thing I said with the other one. You know, more rounded, less defined, very dark, shaded. Even some of the artwork is kind of funky. Now, next, this is where the artwork really settles down and really gets that dark, gritty, really detailed shading that is in Junji Ito. It pretty much carries over for the rest of them. I didn't really see anything art-wise that seemed out of the ordinary. So I would say by this point, this is definitely where his art took off. Now I would feel like that would mean a huge jump in between where these first two were and where the rest of them go afterwards. To see such a drastic change in the art style. Going back to this third story, where the Sandman lives, kind of reminds me of The Longest Dream. It has to do with sleep. It's about this guy who's afraid of sleep. He's like an Arthur, and a chick that he's trying to get help him to stay awake. And pretty much what it is, he's saying whenever he sleeps, there's a dream version of him that's trying to take over his body, and he has to stay awake so that doesn't happen. Woman doesn't believe him at first, of course, even though she's supposed to help him. She's kind of like, nah, that's fine. She lets him sleep. He tries to tie himself up, and then she just comes him loose because she thinks he's ridiculous. Then, the weird part, the kind of grotesque part that we start seeing in some of Junji Ito stuff, what was it? His arm, like, starts going in of itself, or something, and comes out through his mouth, like he's trying to reverse himself, which actually is kind of what's going on. It's weird, and it shows a struggle of both of them trying to keep him awake. He can't sleep too much though, because every time he sleeps, the person tries to come out more. And then the weird part, which happens actually quite a bit in his story, is the self-sacrifice. The kind of, I don't even know if it was romance, but she kind of just like, well, if this is going to happen, I'm just going to let it happen. And she like sticks her arm into his like arm nub hole to try to do whatever, and then she gets sucked up into him. And then it is just like a reverse inside out version of him, but it's just all black because apparently he was like hollow inside or empty inside. That's pretty much it of the story. The Devil's Logic. What happens here is a girl who seemed perfectly happy suddenly kills herself, jumps off a building, and a guy finds her recorder that I'm pretty sure he hid it on her or something. Or for some reason it was recording her day, and he finds it's still intact. He starts listening to it, and what it was is like a devil somehow persuaded her to talk to her and lured her into killing herself. And as the dude's listening to it, he eventually finds himself wandering to the same building and ledge, pretty much reliving exactly what she did until he does the exact same thing. Throws himself off the building and presumably probably killed himself. And that's it. This one was short. Short, simple. Definitely his style, though. Definitely that kind of twisted, brutal, since it, of course, deals with suicide and stuff like that. Satanic stuff, whatever. Not always a huge topic when it comes to evil antagonistic stuff in a story. So that was I would say a new twist, but an old twist to this. I don't know. Next one. The Long Hair in the Attic. There's a girl who had a crush on a guy. He wanted her with longer hair. Eventually, though, he breaks up with her. She still has the hair. She regrets it now. Kind of wants to cut it again. A rat gets stuck in it, and then before she can cut it, for some reason, her head's gone. Her family finds her beheaded. Don't know where the head went. and they're just like, oh, so sad she's dead, don't know what happens. And then, as you can probably guess from the title of the story, they eventually find her head in the attic, strung up with all her hair just to keep her in place. And then whenever they find her, her head just leaves to go find the guy again. So I guess the hair had a mind of its own. Next story, Scripted Love. More stuff. This one's actually the opposite of Black. It kind of goes back to his art style. I'm going to assume, just based off the art styles alone, they're not in order of when they're released, now that I'm thinking about it, because it kind of switches back and forth. You know, this one is more black-white, less gray shading in between, but just this one more on the white side. But all this one is this actress starts hanging out with a guy. People warn her that he's a playboy and he's just going to break her heart, and he will eventually give her a tape that will pretty much lead to a breakup. She goes psycho, tries killing him, but it turns out all the tape is he broke up with her for a fan. What the tape was actually kind of sweet, and it was just him doing something to run lines with her, because that's what they would always do. And until it got weird when she got more obsessed with the video version of him. Immediately, it seems like, because after she nearly kills him, he comes crawling back in and is like, what are you doing? That's just a TV. Like, that's not really me. That was just a recording. She's like, no, this is the one I love now. And then finishes him off and just, I assume, is forever in love with this recording of him. This is actually kind of my least favorite one, the Reanimated Sword. So it's pretty much about a kid. He was like going up to this temple. There's this guy with a sword, and he kind of gets spooked by him and runs away because he thought he was going to get caught or killed or whatever. Ends up falling off a cliff. They eventually find him. Kid goes back. Grandfather's dying. Then this same guy he saw last night comes in, somehow brings him back to real life. The kid, though, is like, oh, that's against nature. Like, you can't do that. And the guy eventually tells him, oh, you also have what it takes to claim this Reanimator Sword or whatever. And then big reveal, he's like, that night you fell off the cliff, you actually died. And it's like, you're lucky I brought you back to life. So now that you think it's wrong to bring people back, do you really think it's against human nature? And the kid's like, yes. And then ends up getting the sword for himself, killing the guy, getting his grandpa dead too, and now he has a sword. That's it. Not my favorite story, honestly. This is actually the longest story in the collection, and I'm still a little confused about what actually happened in it. So this guy, this father, he has, and wife, this couple has 3 kids. He's 2 sons and a daughter. He's like some businessman, whatever, and he's wanting his sons to take over, but for some reason, his oldest son kills himself. Later on, his middle child, that son, kind of, as he gets older, more into teen, dad, not crazy about what he's doing, how he's living his life. For some reason, kid goes unicycling in the road, falls off, lays down as traffic comes, kills himself like that. And then that's pretty much right at the beginning. The rest of it is about his daughter, who seems just like a weird kid, and his middle kid's friend. The father eventually gets that kid to start hanging out with his daughter too. The kid starts to realize something's up with his family, tries to go hang out with the daughter, go to the amusement park. Girl keeps just doing reckless stuff as if she's starting to kill herself. And he goes, tries to tell the dad that she's doing this. Dad's completely blanked out. No pupil eyes, just sitting on a bench, like staring into nothing. And I guess this one's more of a mystery too, actually, trying to figure out what's going on. Skipping a few years later, boy's still hanging out with girl, finds out dad is actually controlling the kids. He said his family has a history of suicide, a lot of suicide in this collection, actually, now I'm thinking about it. And he was controlling his kids because he was wanting to live through them, try to be a kid again, and he was just playing. But then once his sons find out about him, that's when they would get mad, and they were actually going to kill themselves too. And this is the part that's confusing me, because I wasn't sure, and I think even the other kid, the friend, is thinking the same too, that the dad was the one making them kill themselves because he didn't approve of how they were living and they mad at them. But no, I think it's the kids actually did just kill themselves because they were either scared of the dad or didn't like the fact that their dad took him over. But it doesn't really explain why the dad was so reckless with his daughter that we got to see. So I don't know. It kind of goes back and forth. Eventually, though, the daughter and the mom are able to take off. The kid kind of fights the dad. And it seems like the dad actually comes to understanding and then goes off to the carnival or fair or whatever and rides some rides. I'm pretty sure that's not the exact ending, but as far as I remember, it kind of ends like that. And he's never seen again. This is probably the creepiest one. Scary as in very culty, religiously, kind of like religion, but religion, cult, same thing. It's just about these two girls go up hiking a mountain, come across this like Buddhist sect, but they have some kind of weird twist in it where they're trying to be completely away from society because they think that's where all problems are. And if you can just stay away and stay here, then your mind will be free and you just sit there and meditate all the time until you're able to all come together and be one with Buddha. And it's pretty much just about one girl is haunted by people looking at her for some reason and hates being stared at, and she wants to stay, but the other girl she's with is like, this place is weird, we need to get out, but they're very insistent that they stay. Eventually they run into a guy whose brother disappeared along with him, and they all try to investigate for a little bit, and that's unendurable Labyrinth comes in because they follow like this big group that's supposed to go and become one with the mountain, or it's just a weird thing where they're like mummifying themselves alive is what they talk about. But what it is the Labyrinth himself is just lined with all these bodies, and they're looking through all this. And of course, the girl that is terrified of Oz is super paranoid because there's all these like mummified-esque bodies just staring at it, almost staring at them. They could open their eyes at any minute, and that actually is pretty terrifying. But they're going in because the guy they found is very convinced that his brother's going to be there. And then eventually they wander around enough, and they find the group that was originally in there, and they all just start staring at her. I was like, okay, that's it. That was the highlight of it. That was like the big moment. And then it kind of just ends. It feels like it was supposed to keep going. That's kind of my gripe with it. The big moment was the fact that they opened their eyes, and that's what she was scared of. I felt like it doesn't even show if they leave or if they try or make it out, or if anything actually bad does happen to them. It kind of just trails off from there. So I wasn't crazy about that part. But it definitely is getting more into Junji Ito for Village of the Siren. Ooh, this is another one. This is probably the most brutal one. This one, not feeling, doesn't make you feel good. And this is like peak Junji Ito. Maybe it's because it looks like there's this big spiral siren tower that is very reminding of Uzumaki, which is creepy. And there's a scene, or there's a character in there that stabs her ears out, which also happened with Uzumaki. So maybe that's one it gets to me, because Uzumaki was the first thing I read, and it made me scared of spirals. Man, this one's a weird one to try to even explain. This guy was working in a city. He starts hearing stuff about his old village he was in. Something's weird going on in it. His dad, who was like a proud farmer, is suddenly working in a factory. Apparently, there's a new mayor that has taken over and doing weird stuff. And there's news reports that a bunch of babies are going missing. That seemed unrelated. Spoiler, it's not. It has to do with this. So he goes back to this town. On the way, he runs into this other chick that's also happened to be going back because she needs to take care of her dad. They get there. His mom's weird. No sign of his dad. The girl's dad was the former mayor until he got sick, and that's why she's going back. Apparently, at night, there's this big siren that goes off, and it makes you crazy, or it makes you follow the sound. And the old man was able to not be lured into it. The other guy has another friend, and she's the one that stabbed her ears out. What ends up happening is the guy that took over released some demon that was apparently stood away, and the guy ends up being like a reincarnation of some wizard or whatever. Kind of wacky. There was really trying to be some depth and backstory in this one that really Junji Ito doesn't put a lot into, but this one tried. And it paid off. And it was a little weird at times, but it pays off. But yeah, they just go, they follow, because they don't listen. They don't listen to people telling them not to listen to the siren. They don't leave either, even though they felt like they should have. So they're kind of taken over by the siren. And they go and find out, all the women were going around stealing babies. But all the women carrying babies actually slaughtered the babies. And that was, of all the stuff Junji Ito has wrote, that was the most brutal part. To see a scene of like a limp legs of a dead baby in a scene. But that's pretty much it. They were going to need a sacrifice to summon the big bad demon. The girl, the mayor's daughter, was supposed to be a sacrifice, but then they hid it long enough to the deaf girl was going to be a sacrifice, but then the deaf girl knows occult stuff, draws a circle, which apparently enough to keep a demon away, drags the boy in, so then the mayor's daughter gets taken away like originally planned, and then they just fly off and to do the rest of the world, which is actually a very Junji Ito thing to do, which is to leave it open-ended. Now the rest of the world's just screwed. Moving on. Bullied. This is a weird one. This is like really very Junji Ito. This is more where you start to see kind of the humor-esque horror that he puts in his stuff. It's about this little girl who was supposed to kind of babysit, play with this younger kid, but eventually, because she's doing this, she's getting left out of everything else, starts to resent him and starts bullying him. And all this is her telling her fiance or soon-to-be fiance something about how she used to bully him and all that kind of stuff. She ends up with like, oh, by the way, that boy I bullied came back and I'm in love with him. So eventually those two end up together, the girl and the boy she bullied. They have a kid. Guy disappears, and then the kid, being a single mother, has to rely on the mom. But then, same thing as in the past, she starts resenting him. It just shows her dressed back up in her childhood clothes and is just going to bully this, not even bully, straight up just child abuse this kid forever. And that's where it leaves off. It's just her dressed up in her childhood clothes, ready to bully the shit out of her kid. So that brings us to the last, Deserter. I feel like this one is really the staple. Pretty good staple of his like psychological, the haunting, the supernatural. All this wrapped up into one. It pays off. Even though he saved, the title story for last, which is okay. But it is based off a story I know about how it was some deserter during the World War II who thought the war was still going on. It's not exactly the same as the story, I'm assuming, but I think it's a story people are probably familiar with. Is some Japanese soldier deserted or ran off or got lost in some kind of woods, still thought the war was going on until somebody found him. Actually apparently needed research for it. There's credits to a researcher, Yoichi Yoshimura. So I'm assuming, unless there's a whole nother deserter story, it's kind of based off of what I just talked about. But yeah, it's all about this guy deserted, went to his friends, was hiding away with them while doing all this, hiding out. The guy, his friend, also didn't go to the war because he was apparently hurt, and that everyone thinks he's just faking it or using it as an excuse not to go in the first place. But he seems really proud. He's like, if I wasn't hurt, I would have went into the war and fought and all that stuff. But then he starts to resent him, and then his sisters kind of are getting close to him and to this deserter guy. Doesn't really like it. There's a little spat or something, and the older daughter or older sister ends up getting killed. They blame the deserter guy. It's like, this is all your fault, blah, blah, blah. Kind of lame reasonings for it. It wasn't really his fault. But he takes it hard, and he kind of locks himself in his room and only comes out for food when he gets hungry, apparently. But he doesn't let anyone in his room anymore. But while he's doing this, supposed friend or whatever, starts playing tricks on, keeps lying to him, telling him the war is still going on, fakes like attacks and news stories, and he even has like another old person that from their past coming by and pretending that they're looking for deserters, just to try to get them riled up and scared and keep them like that. So he's scared all the time. The other daughter's kind of feeling bad for him. Then all that's going on, and eventually they go back into his. They are able to make into his room because one of the sisters feels terrible for him. Plot twist: the guy is dead. It's just his corpse. This apparently killed himself after the other sister got killed, and it's just been there the whole time. And it's actually been his ghost this entire time, just haunting them. I guess if you can say kind of funny, this was kind of funny. Kind of a little funny into it. That this whole time they were bullying a ghost, and in a twisted way, the ghost was just wasting them time and was kind of haunting them in a whole weird wraparound way that they made themselves haunt themselves. That's the last story. Overall, though, I will say darker in both art style, especially near the beginning before the art style settled down, got really cemented in what we see more of today, and just the stories themselves. Like Junji Ito killing all the characters isn't something we haven't seen him do. He does it all the time. It always happens. But I don't know, something about the way he does it in these earlier ones just seemed a lot more brutal. Draining babies, mothers just abuse their kids. It's not even like we see it. It's just we know it's about to happen. And it's going to be bad. I think that's what makes it worse. And then, of course, all the suicide throughout. There's just so much of it in this one. But that is it for Junji Ito's newest English collection of his oldest stories. That's going to be it for this Otaku News Reviews. If you like it, go ahead and give it a like. You can subscribe, do all that stuff. Leave comments on this stuff too. Until next time, I'm the AC. Bye.